I want to start my remarks by saying I'll be splitting my time with the spectacular member from South Surrey, White Rock, and my comments are no way related to the fact that she has to be our whip, happens to be our whip. But a little bit of levity there. I just want to sort of paint the picture here because I do believe, as I said with my question to the member from King's Hans, we are in serious times. We're in perilous times, right? Whether we look around the world with respect to foreign policy and we see what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Ukraine, it's a time for serious leadership. Leadership is required. And here, back in Canada, things are not all rosy either. Canada's debt for 2023-2024 year is projected to be $1.2 trillion. And that might be hard for the average individual to sort of contemplate, to get their head around. I know it is for me, but that's $81,000 per household. That means people wake up in the morning and their starting place is $81,000 in debt. And that's particularly troubling because Canadians themselves as individuals are the most in debt individuals in the G7. And so the amount of debt and burden that is being piled on Canadians is at some points overwhelming. And then, as famously has been said, the first step to getting out of hole is to stop digging. And unfortunately, this Liberal government continues to dig the hole deeper and deeper and deeper. This year, the PBO says that the deficit will be closer to $46.5 billion. We've heard some chatter in this House already with respect to the fall economic statement. And I am looking forward to seeing that document. I am hopeful, as I am the eternal optimist, that there will be some type of path for fiscal sustainability and a fiscal anchor and a return one day to balanced budget. However, given the last budget, in which they pushed back the date from a balanced budget from 2030 to 2000 and never, perhaps my optimism is a little bit exaggerated. When we look at Canada's debt-to-GDP ratio, that's the other number they use. Is the debt-to-GDP ratio, which was the anchor, the fiscal anchor that the Minister of Finance put before Canadians, and said it will never go up. It will never go up until 6 months later when it did go up. And so the challenge, too, even with the debt-to-GDP ratio, is it doesn't take into consideration the per capita calculation. So Canada's population is growing, and of course I think like all Canadians think that's a great thing. We are growing the number of Canadians, and that's terrific. The challenge, though, is that the GDP is not keeping up with the population growth. Our per capita, that means per capita GDP just means the amount of money that Canadians are earning in layman's terms. That's going down. So yes, there are more Canadians, but there are more Canadians earning less money. That's challenging. We are getting poorer as a nation as the government takes a larger and larger portion. After 8 years, Mr. Speaker, we have a debt at $1.22 trillion, a deficit once again approaching $50 billion, a deficit with over 100, almost a deficit nearly $50 billion at the end of this year. We are digging that hole deeper and deeper and deeper, Mr. Speaker. We simply can no longer afford this Prime Minister and this Liberal government as they continue to pound Canadians into the ground with more and more debt. $81,000 per household of debt per Canadians. But you know what? It doesn't just stop there. There's not just, obviously that money will have to be recovered somehow. Former Bank of Canada Governor David Dodge recently said before Finance Committee that this government will have to do one of two things. They'll have to cut spending or raise taxes because this money has to come from somewhere. And so we have no doubt that this government will be raising taxes. We don't know. I think if I was a homeowner, I would not be shocked, and I'd be a little worried that this government would come after taxing of the principal residence exemption. This government has a track record of seeking taxes wherever they can get them, and this government will be increasingly desperate as we go forward to collect revenue from Canadians. And so, but it's not just direct taxation; it's also indirect taxation. You see, When you have deficit spending, when the government continues to spend, that increases the money supply, which increases inflation. You don't believe me on that? Well, just ask a former Liberal finance minister, John Manley, who recently stated that because his government keeps pushing on the inflationary pedal, the gas pedal, the spending pedal, that's forcing Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada, to push down interest rates in order to fight inflation. So we've got fiscal policy, which is just what the federal government is doing, what these Liberals are doing, which is spending more and more money, increasingly recklessly, like $50 million on a Rive scam. They are spending more and more money, which is causing inflation, which is making everything more expensive. And then as a result of that increased inflation, the governor of the Bank of Canada is having to increase interest rates, which is increasing the cost of housing. As I said, after 8 years, Mr. Speaker, Canadians simply cannot afford this government. Now let's look at the current housing situation and how it's going. So it might be different in other provinces, it might be different in other communities, but I can tell you in the towns of Cobourg, in Port Hope, in Brighton, that it's nearly impossible to get a rental property. If you want to get so much as a one-bedroom apartment, you're looking at least $2,500. That's a wild amount of money. And mortgage payments, if you're fortunate enough to be able to buy a house, have now gone up from an average of $1,500 a month to $3,000 a month. So we have inflation taking a larger and larger chunk of paychecks. We have taxation, which actually takes up more than transportation, housing, and food combined. So we've got the government taking more and more larger share, of which Canadians have an increasingly smaller paycheck. And like I said, if you're trying to rent in Port Hope or Cobourg, you're looking at a cost of $2,500, $3,000. You're looking at a mortgage payment well in excess of that. I want to share with you a little anecdote. This is an actual email that I received from one of my constituents. And it goes as the following. My wife and I have good jobs and we're very thankful we have that. We have yet to own a home together in our 5 years of marriage and have been continually renting with our 2 young kids. We are very thankful for what we have. We are able to secure approximately $400,000 as a down payment from selling a property I owned in a different city before we were married. We were trying to purchase our first home together. The listing price was $800,000. This means we would be putting 50% down. So they would be putting 50% down. They're 2 well-heeled individuals making good incomes. And they would have a mortgage of approximately $2,200 a month. After redoing our budget with the rising costs of groceries, gas, and everything else, we would be in a monthly deficit of $1,000 to $3,000 a month. We have no debts, no car payments, and believe we are fiscally responsible people. If people like us, as it goes on, have decent jobs, a large amount saved, and cannot afford a house, who can? But these are, I repeat this, these are serious times. These are people who have done everything right. They've had their priorities right. They've saved their income. They went to school. They got good jobs. They've worked hard for the community, for our country, and for their children. And the deal is broken. It used to be in 2015, when houses cost half as much, when food was a fraction of the cost it was, that these individuals would be rewarded with being able to afford a house, being able to afford a steak dinner once a week, maybe even, God forbid, being able to go on vacation. Increasingly, the great thief of our prosperity is this Liberal government. Canadians cannot afford them. After 8 years, they've done nothing but bring us into poverty and away from prosperity. We need a common sense leader, and I cannot wait for the member of Carleton to be our next Prime Minister. Bravo.